Hi and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to go over some of the logistics for my trip that I had through the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. If you've been following along, you'll know what I'm talking about, but if you're new here, I did a bikepacking trip and I've posted videos, which I will leave a link for in the description below, through the states of California, Oregon, and Washington, including the Oregon Outback Trail and the Olympic Discovery Trail. In this video, I'll talk about some of the difficulties and wins, some things that I learned along the way. I'll go over a little bit about what my general bikepacking style is, because I think that does matter for your logistics and costs and everything. And I will talk about the cost for the trip so far, so hopefully if you're planning a similar bikepacking trip, you'll have an idea of what to expect. If you are new here, my name is Kyria, and I'm an avid backpacker turned bikepacker a couple of years ago. And in 2024, I actually quit my job so I could travel full time. And the first thing I did was to take a bikepacking trip across the US and Canada. Before I start, I want to thank Jerome, who bought me a beer. Thank you, Jerome. I already drank it. And I really appreciate the support. I know that my videos aren't the greatest sometimes, but I am learning and it does take a lot of work. So I'm really thankful for your support. Okay, now let's get started. First, let me give you a quick rundown of what my route was. So my original plan was to go from Grass Valley, California, up to Klamath Falls, Oregon, where I would start the Oregon Outback Trail. What I was going to do was go from Grass Valley to Downeyville on dirt roads, and then from Downeyville through to Plumas County and Lansing County, and then Modoc County, and then to Klamath Falls. So this would have all been on OHV trails, logging roads, dirt roads, and other kinds of trails like that, with a little bit of pavement thrown in the middle, which is what I really enjoy. I don't really love bikepacking on pavement. It's just not as fun. And especially at the time, I hadn't really done a lot of road riding. And so anytime there was what I considered a small shoulder, it was just a little nerve-wracking trying to manage my route finding and trying to manage all the unknowns of a new bikepacking trip. I really am comfortable with camping. I know the woods. I don't mind being out in the woods by myself. So that is what I wanted to do. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. About a week before my trip started, it snowed about 12 feet in the Sierra Nevadas, and I just had to reroute my trip onto the road. This was not ideal. And also it involved a little bit of last minute scrambling as far as route finding and everything like that. I had a route in mind and then I had to change it. And in the end, I actually had to change it a few times, but this is something that I will talk about a little bit later, because obviously in the end I got better at doing that and less uncomfortable with doing that. But at first it was really quite a pain in the butt, you know? I mean, I had my route all planned out and then the snow came, and so I had to pivot right from the very beginning. The other thing that this meant is right from the get-go, I spent more money than I wanted. So basically I had plans on camping in the woods, and I ended up having to get a motel a few more nights than I had expected. First of all, because I was in civilization, and secondly, because I was going through a lot of private land. So one way or the other, I wasn't really finding places to camp. And so I had to get motels because of that. And then second of all, I actually hit more snow later on and ended up having to get another motel or two or three after that. I also experienced extreme cold temperatures, and I don't mean like Minnesota cold, but definitely temperatures in the low 20s. And so I decided to get a motel because of that as well. So all in all, right from the very beginning, my plan A became a plan B, became a plan C, became a plan D, which I think actually is better in the long run, because you have to realize that it's not going to be perfect. And I realized that right off the get-go, so maybe that's for the best. Also, normally my style is more wild camping style. I had planned to stay in a hotel about once a week so that I could do some sink laundry, shower, and things like that. But obviously, this was not meant to be. Luckily, at the beginning in California, the rooms weren't that expensive. And I'm not staying in 5-star hotels. Usually my level is like a Motel 6 or a Super 8. And in California, they were maybe in the $70 to $80 range. So it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it still wasn't ideal right from the beginning. And as I said, I was actually having to recalculate my route a lot. Like I said, I knew I wanted to do the Oregon Outback, so really all I needed to do was get to Klamath Falls. And then after the Oregon Outback, I knew I was going to stay with a friend in Portland, so I knew I needed to get from the end of that to Portland. And then after that, all I knew was that I wanted to get to Vancouver Island, but I really didn't have the Washington portion of the trip planned out too much in advance. Like I said at the beginning, I had planned it all on dirt. And the one issue with Komoot, and I know some people don't like Komoot, but I actually didn't mind Komoot too much, but one issue is that it doesn't have any weather information or road closure information. So a lot of the times you might have snow over the pass, or you might have construction, or you might have something current that Komoot doesn't calculate. So that's unfortunate, because when I first calculated the route, I went basically through the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, and then through Modoc County, over the Oregon Outback, and then through the, I don't know what they're called, but like the foothills of the Cascades, essentially, because I wanted to stay on dirt. Of course, once I went through California, I realized, wow, this is maybe still winter, and I should probably stay out of the hills in general. And so in the Oregon Outback was actually kind of interesting, because a lot of that is a little bit higher elevation, but then when I went over Lolo Pass, I hit snow, and that was actually lower elevation than some of the areas I'd been in the Outback, which is kind of why I went over Lolo Pass, because I figured, well, I mean, stupidly, right? But it's lower elevation than the Outback, and I just went on the Outback and there wasn't any snow, so I should be able to go over Lolo Pass. Well, obviously that wasn't the case. And once I did that, and then I went to Portland, I decided to recalculate my route again and just avoid the Cascades, unfortunately, because when I did the Cross Washington route, I really enjoyed the Cascades section. So I really kind of wanted to go back into the Cascades, but maybe that's something you need to plan in July or August, not in March or April. So that's when I decided that I needed to figure out an alternate route to get to Vancouver Island. And so I looked at Seattle, and basically going from Seattle, you can take a boat, but it's not a car ferry. And so they charge you $30 for your bike. And so I didn't want to pay the extra $30 for my bike. And so I ended up going from Port Angeles to Victoria instead of Seattle to Victoria. So from Port Angeles to Victoria, don't quote me on this, but I think the cost was about $24 for the ferry, and the bikes were free. From Seattle to Victoria, I don't remember how much the person cost, but the bike cost $30, plus they only allow a few bikes, and so you may not even get your bike on. So I didn't really want the unknown of that. I'd rather go on Port Angeles ferry, where pretty much they can take, I don't know, dozens of bikes. So that's how I finally ended up deciding what to do for Washington, but I didn't decide that until basically I was in Portland, because it was just a lot of configuring and reconfiguring and stuff like that. But one thing I learned, and I was going to talk about this at the end, but I might as well just say it now, is that is how it goes. I mean, maybe you're doing like an ACA route and you have a map and everything like that with updated information, which is great. But if you are making your own route and kind of planning things on your own, you are going to encounter obstacles, and you are going to do things wrong, and you're going to have weather, and you're going to have road closures and construction, and you're going to overestimate the amount of miles that you can do each day, and that just happens, and you just have to roll with it. So when I got to Portland, I actually took a couple days to stay with a friend of mine and buy a lot of groceries and eat a lot of food and recalculate my route and decide what I was going to do. So that's just kind of how it went. So next I'm going to talk about the costs a little, and then after that I'll go over a few of my favorite and least favorite things and a couple of things I learned along the way. I'm going to put the costs up on the screen so that you can see them, and then I'll go over them now. So basically, as you can see, I spent 8 days in California, 12 days in Oregon, and the Oregon number one is the Oregon Outback, and then 3 days that I spent with my friend in Portland. Oregon number two is 5 days that I took off in the middle to go and visit different friends who live near Bend, and in that case I wasn't riding my bike at all. Washington number one is Washington, and that was 4 days there. So all in all, it was 29 days total, and I spent a total amount of dining out for that period of $268 basically. This was 1 breakfast, 2 dinners, and 1 coffee. And the reason it was so expensive is one of those days I was with friends, so I paid for their breakfast and they paid for the accommodation, so it kind of is a wash there. In Oregon, the dining out was basically the same. I took a friend out for dinner and I stayed with her for 3 days. So I didn't include anything for accommodation, but the dining out is a little bit higher than it would have been otherwise. The second Oregon 2, $57 in dining out was exactly the same thing. I paid for a friend's lunch instead of paying for accommodation. So most of my dining out was when I was with friends, and it basically should probably almost be in the accommodation section because I stayed with them and didn't have to pay for accommodation. But if you think about it this way, that was 8 nights that I stayed with friends, and that was $268 that I spent on dining out as a thank you to them for letting me stay with them. The next category is groceries. Now in this case, this is pretty much all things that I ate. So $260 for groceries over the 29 days. So if you look at that, it's almost it's less than $10 a day, which actually is not too bad. For accommodation for all the states, I spent $795 basically. And you can see from the end of the chart that this is basically 10 nights in a motel. All the times I stayed with friends were no cost, and all the wild camping and warm showers were no cost. So the $798 was 10 nights in motels, which is an average of $79 a night for motels. As you can also see from the very end of the chart, basically the average cost for motels in California was about $87, for Oregon was about $75, and for Washington was about $66. For transportation, these are obviously just little things, but in California, it was a bus I had to take from Redding to Boerne. In Oregon 1, that was the bus I took from Hood River to Portland. Oregon 2 was gas that I paid for my friend, and Washington 1 was the Port Angeles ferry. So as you can see, the total for everything was $1,380 basically, and you can see the average per day per state. So California was essentially the most expensive state, and the Oregon 2 doesn't really count because I stayed with friends, so it didn't count any accommodation. But essentially the Oregon 1 is the Oregon Outback costs, and then Washington 1 is the time in Washington. So California was definitely more expensive, but a lot of that does come from the dining out, which is where I bought my friend and her kids breakfast. So when you're considering the cost for yourself, unless you're paying for a bunch of other people's breakfasts, you can probably take that out. In case you're wondering, the breakfast was $57 and it was for 4 people. So let's get to some of the best and worst parts. So the best part of my journey was actually probably almost the same as the worst part of my journey, which maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but maybe it does. So one of my favorite things, now that I'm looking back, obviously, maybe in the moment it wasn't, but was the trip through the snow near Boerne, California. So it was really a pain. Kamut took me onto a dirt road. I could have just stayed on Highway 299. However, I did tell it that I wanted to try dirt, so it took me on dirt. Little did it know, there had been a snowstorm the day before, and so I was going through inches of snow on private or maybe semi-private logging roads. And so it was definitely challenging, but it was really beautiful. I was the first person there, so the snow was untouched, and it just was really magical. And I actually considered camping there, but it was supposed to get really cold overnight, so I ended up not camping there in the end. But things like that, like you're definitely going through a struggle, but in the end, it's actually very beautiful at the same time. So those are kind of my favorite things. It's those type 2 funds that you kind of grumble, but really you are still kind of enjoying it at the same time. And I don't mind a challenge, to be honest. So it was hard, but it was beautiful. And once I was done, I was very happy. But also I enjoyed my time there. There were just little like animal footprints, and the trees had the snow on them, and it was just a winter wonderland. So that was actually kind of nice, even though it was difficult. Am I having fun yet? Well, the other thing I really liked was the Oregon Outback. I really love the fact that pretty much all the western states, so California, Oregon, and Washington, all have a ton of public land. So National Forest land, BLM land, all these things. I love being able to just stop when I want to stop, put my tent down on the side of the Forest Service Road or wherever I am, and just be. I really, really like that. So the Oregon Outback, I only stayed in a hotel one night, and otherwise I was in the woods most of the time. Once I got a little bit closer to the Columbia River, that does get a little bit into private land, and so that was a little bit more dicey. But at the very beginning, it was just beautiful. There were trees, there was water, there were views, there was just solitude. I really just love that feeling. So if you're thinking of doing the Oregon Outback, I recommend it. I think you should do it. I think it's really, really calm and peaceful, and it's nice. Even the roads that you ride on that are paved are pretty low trafficked, so it's a really nice route. The other thing I really liked, and again, this was one where it was kind of difficult, but also cool, was Lolo Pass. if you watch my videos, and I can post it here, but if you watch the video, I got turned back at Lolo Pass because there was a ton of snow. And I could have probably pushed through and been stronger, more determined or whatever, but I had to meet my friend in Portland. And I decided it just wasn't worth trudging through the snow for another, like, who knows how many miles. And it also started snowing. So, but it was, again, hard, but beautiful. I was the only person out there. It was totally silent except for the sound of the snow and the creek, and just, it was really nice. It was peaceful. It was cold, but it was nice to just be out in the woods. I really like doing that, and it makes me feel good about myself and the world and everything. So I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to be there when no one else was there. I don't know if everyone has done that before, but I think if you haven't, you should. And if that means like sometimes you have a little bit more struggle and the roads aren't open, then that's okay. You get a little bonus at the end of being able to see it when no one else is there. So I really enjoyed that, and I would do it again, even though I didn't get to where I was trying to go. But you know what? That's okay. That's okay. You don't always need to get to where you're trying to go. You can go around, you can figure out an alternate route, you can stop and take a bus if you want to. You don't have to do everything exactly how you planned, and I don't think that I didn't finish. I just did it a different way. So I really had a good time doing that. The other thing I really love is the Olympic Discovery Trail. And on this trip, I only got to go on the little bit of a paved part that goes in between basically, I don't even know where it starts, the highway and Squim, actually Port Angeles, but when I did the Cross Washington trip, I really enjoyed the adventure portion of it. And listen, when I did the Cross Washington trip, I didn't know anything about single track, so the adventure portion was very scary, but I did it and I conquered it, and I didn't die and I didn't fall. And so if you are thinking of doing a bikepacking trip, I think the Olympic Discovery Trail is a great just starter one. You can do maybe an overnight or something like that, and there's plenty of places to camp, and it's just a really fun trail, and it goes near the water, and most of it's paved, but there's lots of options. You can eat, you can stay in a motel if you want. It just has a lot of options, and it's beautiful, and it's moist, and it's green, and it's pretty, and there's water. So, but I remember doing the Cross Washington and thinking, oh, I one day wanted to come and go to Port Angeles and take the ferry across to Vancouver Island. And guess what? I did it. And I'm really glad I did. So it was everything I wanted and more. So all of those were my best favorite things. And listen, there were tons of other things that I enjoyed, but those are some of the highlights. Now let's talk about the difficult things. One of the things I really hate about bikepacking and biking in general is the chamois. I hate it. And this was the start of my trip, and so I wasn't really sure how to manage the chamois. And what I realized is that you need to wash the chamois a lot, because any little tiny bit of sweat or dirt or anything on it, hair or whatever gets on your chamois, can make your ride very uncomfortable. And so the other thing is the padding. This is something I didn't know. So if you're a cyclist, you're probably like, duh. But if you're a new person, then here we go. The padding has different thicknesses. I just bought a pair of diaper pants off of Amazon and thought, well, all diaper pants are the same. I'm going to wear these diaper pants and they're going to be great. They weren't great. They're very uncomfortable. The padding would get wedged up in my groin as I was riding, and then the legs would start to ride up, and then the whole thing was like basically a wedgie while I was riding a bike, which is not fun. So I shortly realized maybe these weren't the best quality diaper pants, and I got some Pearl Izumis, which were much better. However, let me tell you another tip that I learned, and this is do not dry your chamois in the dryer. So those chamois were great until I washed them and dried them, and then they were all misshapen, and then the padding started going in places that it doesn't belong, and then those were uncomfortable too. So what I ended up doing was alternating. I would wear the chamois one day and wear no chamois the next day, and in the end I started wearing the no chamois more days than not, and I didn't wear a chamois very much after that. But the chamois is the bane of my existence. The other bane of my existence is having to pee when there's nowhere to pee. So I guess that's my second thing that I hate. I love being in the woods. You can just go wherever you want. I hate being in civilization where you have a bike and it has a bunch of stuff on it, and you have to figure out where to stop for the bathroom and where to leave your bike and what to do with your stuff, and all of that stuff, especially at first, is a little hard to figure out. So I mean, when you're hiking or you're just a person getting out of a car, you can walk into a restaurant and not worry about your stuff. But when you have a bike full of stuff and it is all your stuff, it's a different story, and you get used to doing it. But at the beginning, that's definitely something that's a little bit difficult. The other thing that was probably the hardest or most difficult time was something that was in my first video, which is in California still. When I first started off, I left from Redding, I went up the hill, and it started snowing on me. And I also hit snow, and I was trying to get to Bernie, and I just didn't know what the conditions were gonna be, and I was still going uphill. So I decided to turn around and make a new plan. So what I did was I got down to 299, Highway 299, which goes to Bernie and to Redding, so it goes both ways. Essentially, there was no people, or there were a few like little residences, and I seriously considered maybe knocking on someone's door. And then I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna hitchhike. And so I stuck my thumb out on Highway 299, hoping to get to Bernie, but it was raining and snowing, and I was very wet, and I had a bike with me, and nobody stopped. And I even thought, like, people with trucks, they'll stop, right? They can stick the bike in the back of the truck. So I just kind of looked around and found, luckily, a feed store. And the guy had a heater, and I went inside and I begged him to sit near his heater and warm up. And I ended up talking with him and asking him if he knew anybody that maybe could give me a ride. So at this point, I had decided to go back to Redding because it was supposed to snow in Bernie that night and the next day. And so I thought, you know, even if I get to Bernie, what am I gonna do? So I decided to go back to Redding. Anyway, his friend came and picked me up and put my bike in his truck and took me down to Redding, and I tried to give him money for gas and he refused. And so that was like the worst day, but also the best day, because you learn that people are very nice, and it's amazing what you can find when you're not expecting it. So again, most of the worsts are actually bests and vice versa, because I don't know, you always learn something from the worst things, and sometimes good things come from bad things. So it's just interesting how those stories unfold. So I guess speaking of how stories unfold and learning things and all that stuff, I'm going to talk about a couple things that I learned. One thing, check the weather. I did check the weather, but check it more. I mean, I don't need to be totally obsessed with the weather, but I do think that you need to just check and see what is ahead of you, just so you can be prepared. You don't have to turn around or anything. You just need to be prepared. And also check the road closures. I mean, Lolo Pass, again, like I said, I'm really glad I went, and I had a good time, and I had some solitude and everything, but I probably could have avoided it by just checking the DOT website. But I just assumed that since the Oregon Outback was high, Lolo Pass wasn't as high, there wouldn't be any snow. That was my bad. And, you know, normally I plan ahead a lot, and so I was kind of winging it, and this is what I get for winging it. But again, it wasn't the end of the world. A few last words of wisdom for you. I don't know if you're an ultra runner, but I am, and one of our main, well, we have two actually. Two of our main phrases are, number one is embrace the suck. This is something I think obviously goes for bike packing as well. Sometimes it rains on you, it snows on you, you have to turn around, you get muddy, you get a flat tire, etc., etc., etc. I think that these are all just a day in your life, and it's not the end of the world. And so I do think you just need to embrace it. You'll be more resilient for it, and that is one thing that I've always been kind of resilient, but each new challenge that comes up and each new thing, you have to realize how to deal with it and what to do and how to get to the next place and how to fix something. Definitely is difficult in the moment, but I think later on you kind of just have that feeling of pride over yourself, and it feels good. So I think it is a double-edged sword. The other ultra running saying is relentless forward motion. And what this kind of means, it doesn't mean just, you know, trudging along, marching along, whatever. It just means that a lot of times when you think that you want to quit, you just take one more step. And in the bikepacking world, just keep pedaling. Just like Nemo would say, right? Or is it Dory? I think it's Dory. Anyway, just keep pedaling, just keep taking one more step, no matter what. Sometimes just that one more step or one more step after that or one more step makes you have a different mindset, and then the whole day turns around. So anytime you get into a negative mental state or physical state, and I'm not talking about injury or anything like that, but a lot of times you just need to just keep pedaling and things will get better. So those are the logistics, the costs, the planning, and my wise words of wisdom for you for today. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and happy trails. Don't film and drive. No filming and driving. Whoop. Okay, everybody's okay.